Hello and welcome back. We're going to be looking at political beliefs and behaviors, the nature and measurement of public opinion. So this is the next big unit in thinking about how we come to understand public attitudes and beliefs and values. This unit's going to specifically look at how do we measure what is public opinion in terms of what people are thinking. So before we begin in terms of jumping right into the measurement of public opinion, I want to talk with you briefly about what is public opinion. How do political scientists define it? Public opinion is people's collective preferences towards political matters. So these are things that can be measured based on how favorable someone feels towards the President of the United States, or how unfavorable someone feels about the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And the key thing to understand is that there are many publics, that there are individuals who share common attributes on any number of issues, on any number of demographics that could influence public opinion and public attitudes. We've already talked about some of these. For example, religious affiliation or age and cohorts. These are important in terms of thinking about how publics come together around particular issues and then how they divide on particular issues. So we know that there are many publics out there in terms of thinking about public opinion. I want to define two of these in particular for you right now. The first is what is known as the attentive public. These are individuals who follow politics and government affairs. Okay, so these are those individuals who are maybe watching the news several times a week, or go to a particular political blog or an online news website on a regular basis to follow political news. These are what political scientists call attentive members of the public, as opposed to inattentive members, which do not do these types of engagement measures with political information. The second big public that political scientists and communication scholars often talk about is what are known as issue publics. These are individuals who follow a particular public policy issue. So they might care about only one particular policy issue at election time or in making particular decisions about attitudes towards government. So for example, there are issue publics around gun rights, abortion, many other potential issues that you can think out there could very well form a niche group of individuals around that particular issue. So when we think about how measuring opinions is important to understanding attentive publics as well as issue publics and inattentive publics as well, it's important to understand that accurately polling can be quite difficult. So to assess these opinions, it can actually be quite difficult for public opinion researchers, for political scientists, to really get at carefully what the public is thinking at any one time. There's a couple of reasons why polling, the polls that you might see, for example, in the news, that you might see on someone's Facebook feed, there's a reason why these polls are so difficult to get. The first is that there is quite a bit of ignorance in the American public. Political scientists know that the levels of political knowledge among members of the public is actually very low, okay? So what we know is that ignorance is endemic across the population of individuals in the United States when thinking about American government and politics. And this is because of, as we talked about, as I just said, the levels of political knowledge are low, but also because, going back to that term we talked about, that there are many members of the inattentive public that don't follow public affairs on a regular basis. Individuals have busy lives, they have families, they have work, they have other activities that are non-political and take them out of following politics on a regular basis. Second big reason why polling can be quite difficult for individuals in the populace is because there's a general lack of interest among many people in political life. They are not interested in the workings of government or in the day-to-day machinations of a political campaign. So this means that polling them on something might be quite difficult if they're not following it to begin with. Finally, I want to emphasize that there are many different options out there for thinking about how opinions can change based on particular circumstances. So this is what political scientists think about with the instability of opinions, that very little members of the public, as we talked about previously, fall into that very liberal, very conservative spectrum, but really it's somewhere in the middle where most Americans fall. And because of this, you have an instability of opinions. Preferences may be hardened on some issues, and also softer on other issues and more malleable, that is more movable on other particular issues. So again, part of the reason why it's very difficult in some instances to poll on public opinion for any number of reasons: ignorance, lack of interest, as well as the instability of opinions. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, why is public opinion important then? If it's very difficult to assess the opinions of the public, if individuals might be attentive on some issues and inattentive on others, why is it important to really understand public opinion? Well, think about in terms of the roots of American democratic processes. The foundations of constitutional thought in the United States are based on this notion, this generalized notion of representative democracy. That because it is a form of information and feedback for elected officials, public opinion becomes very important. And you can think about this with regard to policymaking, how individuals form thoughts about particular policies and then inform their elected officials about those particular policies, as well as political campaigns. Political campaigns and elections. Election day is a form of public opinion. The results that we get on election day represent a form of public opinion that individuals have expressed. So elections are the rendering of public opinion. So when you think about representative democracy as we elect individuals in the United States to then represent us in the halls of power in Washington, D.C., the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, you can see how public opinion becomes very important not only to the initial selection of who represents us, but also how responsive our elected officials are to us once they are in Washington, D.C. So public opinion in a Republican form of government is both harnessed and tempered due to separation of powers and checks and balances. So again, I want you to think back in your memory banks to what we have talked about in this course related to the creation of American government, the compromises that took place in terms of a bicameral legislature, in terms of a House and a Senate, as well as separation of powers between different branches of government. Public opinion is both harnessed and also hampered in these ways. So the House of Representatives was designed to be closer to the people and thus the opinions of the people. So due to more frequent elections, members of the U.S. House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, that these members of Congress are more attentive to the opinions of the public. So that means the House of Representatives oftentimes is very much the hot coffee in the coffee cup. It's responding to the opinions of the mass public. You then turn to other institutions that were designed to cool public opinion, that were designed to put that hot coffee cup onto a saucer and let it cool. So these would be things like the U.S. Senate. Senators have a longer term of office, 6 years. It's designed to insulate them from public opinion more. The Electoral College, a step in between directly electing the President of the United States and electing electors who will then elect the President of the United States officially. These were designed to insulate government from public opinion. Many of the founders expressed concerns about the direct opinions of the American public pushing government in radical directions one way or the other. These tempering items in our institutions are designed to make sure that while public opinion is heard, it doesn't necessarily move government too radically in one direction or another. But what this does, what this result is that it creates potential divisions between policy decisions and public opinion. So you might have those moments where Americans complain that their elected officials are not responding to their needs or responding to the needs of the public. In fact, this is how the system is set up. There are natural divisions between the purposes of those in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, and there are natural divisions between the branches of government as well. A system of federalism, a system of separation of powers and checks and balances ensures that radical decisions are very hard to make in American government, something that the founders wanted to put a check on after their experience with the British monarchy. So when we think about 4 perspectives on public opinion, when we think about how do all of these ideas come together, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. All of these perspectives inform American government in some way. So for example, majority rule. This is the notion that opinions held by the majority count most toward democratic decision making. This is most understood when we look at elections. In elections, the candidate with the most votes wins. You see a representation of majority rule here as an example of how our elections are conducted in the United States. Second big perspective is known as opinion equality. This is that all opinions, regardless of whether or not they are in the majority or the minority, matter and must be heard. So these should be taken into account, including minority opinions, when formulating public policy. This is oftentimes why public policy has to go through a process of compromise in the US Congress to compensate for minority viewpoints on particular issues. The third big perspective on public opinion is what's known as group debate. This is that interest groups are the ones that place issues in front of the public and debate them. So a nice example of this is if you look at the debate regarding gun rights and gun control in the United States, you have two large interest groups at play setting the debate for not only policymakers in the US Congress, but also for the public. You have the National Rifle Association, the NRA, which is supportive of expanded gun rights under the Second Amendment, setting one side of the debate. And then you have the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, which is an interest group that advocates for gun control measures under the Second Amendment, setting the debate on the opposing side. So this notion of public opinion is that oftentimes our opinions are shaped by interests that are by private interests outside of government that help to influence policy and decision making within government. Finally, another key area of public opinion that is an important perspective for political scientists is what's known as elite-directed public opinion. This is that political elites, whether that be the President of the United States, whether that be members of the President's administration, members of Congress, and even news media outlets, they direct individuals to think about issues in particular ways. They set the agenda in terms of what to think about. And the key thing to understand here is the amount of influence that political elites have in the American political process. So you see this with the importance of political pundits on maybe Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC, as well as political party leaders, elected officials, and journalists, and how they shape the debate that then trickles down to the public. So now that we have these out of the way, I want to move on in our next video to talking with you about how do we think about how many of these opinions come to the American public, okay? So we've talked about briefly thinking about elites, thinking about interest groups, thinking about how do opinions that are held by those in power ultimately trickle out and trickle down to members of the public. So that's what we're going to focus on in the next video, and I look forward to talking with you about that.